Today we're privileged to listen to John Reese. He's a hydrogeologist and an environmental consultant working for several decades here in the United States on issues of hazardous waste. He then turned his attention to issues in Israel and Palestine. He lived there for 7 months in 2002 working with the International Solidarity Movement and the Palestinian Hydrology Group. While there, he coordinated the International Solidarity Movement actions. He was the coordinator of the Olive Harvest Campaign, and he also published one of the first reports on the separation wall or the apartheid wall or the security wall, whatever you want to call it. But we're privileged to have John Reese here, somebody who has been there on the ground seeing some of the problems of two peoples trying to share one land. We're happy to have him, and we'll welcome him and turn the time over to John Reese now.
Thank you. So I'm going to focus primarily on what we might call facts on the ground. It's things that I saw in my travels there, 7 months, as was said. I traveled all throughout the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, went to all the major cities and about 100 villages, primarily working from a hydrologic or hazardous waste aspect anyway with the Palestinian Hydrology Group. And if we could dim, are they up front here? Okay. Just sounds like we've got a lot of people that know what's the geography at least, but just briefly wanted to go through some of this. Israel proper, the West Bank, Gaza Strip. This is a blow up of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The gray areas are Palestinian areas, and the pink areas are Israeli settlements. You have Hebron, Jerusalem, or Bethlehem, Jerusalem, Jericho, Ramallah, Kakilia, Nablus, Tulkarm, and Jenin. And we have a blank screen. How did that happen? Okay, so I did do some work with the International Solidarity Movement, which is a group trying to bring about a nonviolent end to the occupation. This is from when I was at the Church of the Nativity during the siege in April with the doors behind me, the soldiers coming in to take us away. I'm not going to go into all the aspects of that. I'll focus primarily on, like I said, the water and haz waste type issues. But this is in Jenin, just to get some of the idea of the destruction of the camp, creating a lot of problems, of course, for the water and just the destruction caused, again, by the incursion. This is about 6 months later when I went back in, showing some of the area cleaned up. This is a chart from a report by the Palestinian PENGON, Palestinian Environmental NGOs Network. This chart comes from there. The effects of the Israeli occupation, or you could call it the reasons for political conflict. You have the occupation practices, which consist of the bypass roads, the settler bypass roads that crisscross the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, where Palestinians are not allowed to use. You have the settlements themselves that I'll go into, some of the environmental problems created by those. The industries, about 200 industries, Israeli industries, have moved into the West Bank, creating environmental problems. Water depletion due to both the industries and the settlements from the West Bank. About 85% of the water in the West Bank is controlled by Israel. The closures, the checkpoints, the barricades, the curfews, the trenches, and the ditches across roads that create problems of movement, as well as destruction of resources, infrastructure. All these occupation practices creating land confiscation, pollution, land fragmentation, resulting in environmental degradation, loss of agriculture, health, social, economic problems. So you have this vicious cycle going around and around, creating more political conflict. As a result, you have an increase in the occupation practices. So just this vicious circle of conflict. Oh, let's see, one more. Forgot this. One thing that I added also are practices specifically of the military. Depleted uranium has been used in the West Bank, and as well as there's suspected nuclear waste. We don't know for sure, but it is well known and documented that Israel does have a nuclear industry and possibly 200 to 400 nuclear weapons, so they are producing nuclear waste, and very likely some of that ends up in the West Bank. A lot of garbage is dealt with by burning because of the barricades, the trenches across roads, et cetera. Very difficult to get garbage out of villages. So as a result, the garbage is burned and thus creating air pollution problems. This is in El Ram, which is south of Ramallah. Garbage trucks are rarely seen because if you fill them up, where do they go? Again, with the checkpoints, the barricades, et cetera, very difficult to get the garbage trucks around. Tires are often shot out, and trucks are confiscated. When I was in Nablus, a garbage truck driver was shot and killed when he was picking up garbage. This is a waste pile near Jayus, which is up in this area near Kakilya. It's not really a landfill because it's not lined. There's no monitoring devices, neither for air nor water. And it's just an uncontrolled dumping of waste. Colleagues of mine have followed trucks carrying Israeli waste from outside the West Bank in this area into Kalkilia. So it's comprised of both some Palestinian waste and Israeli waste. Most settlements are built on the tops of hills. Many of the ones that I went to did have piping, and many of the piping is going down to the lowland with outfall to the lowland areas, the valleys, polluting Palestinian farmland and creeks. This is a pipe. It's not flowing a lot right now. This is from a settlement in the Ramallah area. Pipe up above that renders this land unfit for agriculture, and it's not just human waste. I mean, they have small industries in the settlements, cottage industries, and also, of course, the household chemicals that are flowing out the pipes. They did build a diversion trench in this area, but it often overflows, rendering this whole area unfit at times. Another settlement in the Jayus area, same thing with a pipe going down, waste flowing. These trees are dying, and there's about 10 acres of what was wheat that's been destroyed by the waste material. Israeli colonies, Israeli settlements, the pink areas that I showed, I don't think they're indicated on this map, but there's about 130, depending on what you call settlements in the West Bank. This is Jerushi Industries. This is an industry, one of the 200 that I mentioned, that's moved into the West Bank in the Tulkarm area. It's an insecticide, pesticide, fertilizer company, manufacturer. One of the highest rates of cancer are known in this area, primarily from the air pollution. When I got out of the car, my eyes are burning and I'm gagging from the fumes in this area. Behind it has a pipe. It's not flowing much right now, but it's obvious in the past that it hazardous waste has flowed and destroying, again, farmland, Palestinian farmland. This is Burkan industrial area near Ariel. It's the largest settlement in the West Bank. And you have about 60 industries up on the hill. Again, pipes down below with waste flowing to Palestinian farmland. This is not flowing too much right now, but it's obvious that a good bit of sediment and waste material has flowed in the past. This is about a 10-acre field that's got about 18 inches of sludge through it. This creek is contaminated. Wouldn't want to drink from it, bathe in it. I wouldn't want it flowing on my land, my farmland, but that's what it does. This is one of the trenches that they dig when there's an invasion. They bring in bulldozers, the Israeli soldiers do, and dig trenches to restrict the flow of Palestinians. So they will cut a trench across the roads. Often when that happens, water lines are broken, as well as hazardous waste, or rather waste material, sewage material. And this is a trench in the Nablus area. This is where they pile up the material again to restrict the flow or the movement of Palestinians. And this is from the broken water line that dug this, but the bulldozer dug that. This is a village of Zabuba. This is where there's a military base up on the hill, and they routed their waste material so it flows through the village. This is waste flowing through the village. When villagers tried to divert the flow, the soldiers came out and wouldn't let them do it. So there's continuous waste flowing through here. This is again in the Nablus area. This is not the best picture. It's taken at night, but there's water spewing up all over and pooling down here. This is where, again, one of their dozers came through. One of the Israeli soldiers' dozers came through, and it's just broken the pipeline, and so water's flowing. Water trucks are often restricted. Their movement is. This is near Nablus, but these are trucks that need to get into Nablus to take water to two villages in the area, Beit Farik and Beit Dajan. These villages, as well as another 100 or so in the West Bank, rely on what they call cistern trucks, water trucks that need to come in, fill up, and then get them out to the villages. So they rely totally on these trucks for water. This is the third day in a row that the water trucks have been stopped at the checkpoint. And what we tried to do, both Palestinian Hydrology Group, ISM, International Solidarity Movement, as well as some of the Israeli human rights groups that we worked with, Hamaked being one in particular, was to try to negotiate with the soldiers to let the water trucks through. But this was one of the tasks that we were always doing, was monitoring the checkpoints to make sure that these water trucks would get through. Because for 3 days in this situation, those two villages had gone without any water. This is a water project by the Palestinian Hydrology Group. This is up near El Farah, which is north of Nablus, kind of northwest of Nablus, up in that area. And it's a canal that's connected to a spring, and it's part of an irrigation system for farmland in the area. However, these structures, the water containment structures, et cetera, are built without permits. It's very difficult to get any kind of permit from the Israeli government. And if you build a structure without a permit, then you get a demolition order, and Israeli military will come in with their tanks and destroy the structures. This is a well house in the Gaza Strip that was blasted by an Israeli tank, destroying the well inside the well house. And this is a well for irrigating farmland, excuse me. These are tanks that are normally up on the tops of homes. This is where they store their water for domestic use. It's a favorite target of Israeli soldiers when they come in during an invasion, so thus affecting the domestic supply of the Palestinian villages and cities. This is a field, agricultural field, farmland that was totally ripped up by a bulldozer. This is in the Gaza Strip, irrigation pipe destroyed, and the crops obviously destroyed. This is the bulldozer that does it. It's a D9 made by Caterpillar. You have the giant hook in the back. This is the type bulldozer that they also use for destroying homes. I mentioned the closures, and this is one of the checkpoints that restricts the movement of Palestinians, but also the movement of trucks that need to get in to repair facilities, trucks that are bringing material in, and also trucks bringing in people to repair it. So very difficult to get through the checkpoints. So it definitely inhibits the correcting of any damage, the repair of any damage due to invasions. This is just, again, one of the checkpoints, the guard tower to it. This is a checkpoint in Khan Yunis, the Gaza Strip. I call it the longest red light in the world. I sat there for 11 hours trying to get through that checkpoint, and that's what Palestinians have to do every day to go to school, go to hospital, to worship, whatever. And also, of course, restricting movement of repair vehicles and maintenance vehicles, et cetera. This is what you often see at a checkpoint, a tank, and on this day what we were doing was trying to assist those that had authorization to see doctors. The checkpoint was closed completely, and one of the things that International Solidarity Movement would do would be, if they had the legal papers, the paperwork to go see the doctor and the permit, even though the soldiers were stopping them, we would surround the Palestinian and then walk with them across the checkpoint. Of course, on this day, the machine gun was quite busy, as well as tear gas and sound bombs. But we eventually, again, negotiated with them to open up the checkpoint and at least let those in need of medical attention by. This is an Israeli settler road. As I mentioned, you have bypass roads, and if you have a yellow-plated vehicle, Israeli ID, you can drive on those roads. But if you have a green plate, you're restricted to Palestinian roads. And in this area, this was a Palestinian road, but the nearby Israeli settlement took over the road, so Palestinians could no longer travel on it, and so they had to use this alternative road that then got a blockade across it. So if you do want to travel, if you want to even try to risk going from village to village, you have to get in a taxi and drive to the barricade, get out of the taxi, walk across the barricade, get in another taxi, drive to the next barricade. And likewise, again, if you're trying to do any repair, getting anything in for structures that have been damaged, the same thing you have to do. So this is an alternative means of getting material and goods through. In this case, it's just trying to get food in, horse and donkey cart, using back roads to take goods in. This is a road that's been ripped up by that bulldozer, the hook of the bulldozer, again, to restrict movement. I also did a good bit of work on the wall that's being built. I call it just the wall in the sense that it is a structure that restricts movement, is enclosing Palestinians in. In some areas, it is a system of metal barricades, electrical fences, barbed wire, and et cetera. Like on the left, barbed wire ditch, road for the military police that guard the border, or guard this where the fence is, not a border really, but where they've decided to put it, an electrical fence. And then usually, this is under construction, but there will usually be razor wire over on this side too. The fence is 28 feet high, concrete. It's about 10% of this first phase that's been completed is wall around Ecological. It's completely encircled, and you have only one way to get in and out. This is the wall around Ecological area. This was during the construction phase in 2002. I believe this was about August that I took this picture of 2002. And my clicker's not working. So just to give you a little bit more detail on where the fence is going, the wall, the barricade, barrier, what have you. It's cutting into Palestinian land. This is the 67 line, the green line from the pre-67 war, before the invasion. And this is all the purple is the land that's going to be lost in this first part of the building of the wall. This is the first phase, but they're constructing in this area also. It's completed in some areas north of Jerusalem and south of Jerusalem near Bethlehem. It's not for sure where it's going to go along this way, but if you look at what the military wants, that's the approximate location. This is by Gush Shalom, which is just a little simpler. It gives you an idea of where it's going. So with the building of the wall, not only is land confiscated, but a number of wells have been confiscated. 36 wells are on the Israeli side of the wall, and about another 14 or so have been impacted. Either their piping destroyed or the wells themselves destroyed during the construction activities of this wall, this barrier. That's about almost 1/4 of the total amount of wells. There's about 250 wells somewhere around there in the West Bank, so 50 wells are completely gone. And this is an area that has what's called the highest transmissivity. It's the highest yield wells, this area, Tulkarm, Kilkilia, of the western aquifer, the highest yielding aquifer in the West Bank. This is the area where you have the highest yield wells. So these wells, these red numbers, all indicate wells that are lost. This green hatched area is farmland that's all lost. This is kind of the breadbasket of the West Bank, and it's about 50% of it's gone. There was a military order instituted in '67, order number 92, and basically that set up the system where you have to get permits. And to date, in the western aquifer anyway, there haven't been any permits given for wells, and all over the West Bank, according to Applied Research Institute of Jerusalem, only 3 irrigation wells have been allowed since '67. Oftentimes, Israeli settlers come in and will drill deeper wells. So if a Palestinian well is, say, 300 meters deep, an Israeli settlement will build a well about 700 meters deep or so and dry up the Palestinian well. Greenhouses are also lost due to the construction of the wall. These greenhouses got demolition orders. This is in the Kilkilia area, so they were still in the process of building the wall. But these greenhouses, as I understand now, are gone. And they certainly rely on the greenhouses for their food. In this case, 250 have been lost because they're on the Israeli side of the wall. This is in the Kilkilia area, Falamia, Jayus villages. During the construction, the Israeli work crews would come in and dig up olive trees. About 100,000 olive trees have been lost in the construction of this barrier. I witnessed personally about 100 or so that were dug up. They dig them up, cut the limbs off first, dig them up, and then replant them on the Israeli side of the wall. So they're lost to the Palestinians. This is what it looks like afterwards. They've removed all the olive trees in this area and then replanted them on what will be the Israeli side of the wall. This is one of the many farmers that I met that has lost everything. Because of the construction of the wall, this farmer who's had this farmland for generations no longer can feed his family. His family will no longer have any way to make a living. It's a massive construction project. It's like building a super 8-lane highway, sometimes 200 yards in width, at least during the construction phase. Massive cut and fill project, so of course having a major effect on the flora and fauna in the immediate area, as well as creating a physical barrier and thus interrupting migratory paths of numerous species. And it can create a loss of some species in certain areas due to lowering of genetic diversification. So they bring in the drills and then shoot the hillside, blow up the hillside to construct the wall. In the area where it's populated, where there's people, that's where it's primarily a wall. The fence is in the areas where it's primarily forest or just vegetation. Here is where it is going to be a fence, it is now a fence, but this is when it was under construction. This is in the Solemn area, which is near Jenin. It was where it was first starting to be built. You have the concrete footer and then eventually the fence, but it's going to create problems with stream sedimentation, erosion. You're moving around a lot of dirt here, which is going to create problems. Just a picture of one of the gates that rarely open. Supposedly there's gates that open that let soldiers through, but I stay in touch with people on almost a weekly basis to get reports from what's going on, and Palestinian farmers, for the most part, are not being allowed through the gates to get to their farmland, so they're basically cut off from their source of food and income. This is, again, the electronic fence, and this is a period when it's under construction. Just one final picture of the wall, again in the Kakilya area. Concrete structure creating massive problems. This is it's called the Sharon plan here, but it's definitely what Sharon's pushing for. And this is the green line, West Bank, and after the wall is completed, this is about what you'll have. But you have a series of Bantustans anyway right now. So it's really even cut up in smaller amounts, because to go from Nablus to Ramallah is very difficult. It's you've got to go through checkpoints, and so it's even really more cut up than this map indicates. Just briefly, normally go over some things that you can do, but mainly I would just ask that people try to educate yourself as much as possible, which it sounds like a lot of people are doing here. And there's one sheet that I have out on the table outside that has this flow chart, as well as a number of websites to look through, both Israeli groups and Palestinian groups, and some groups here in the States that can give you a lot of information. So we can turn the lights back on and turn this thing off, and maybe do some question and answer if you'd like. Yeah. Well, that's based on a survey done by the Palestinian hydrology group listing the wells that are in the West Bank. I mean, it may not be every hand-dug well, but it's primarily those wells that are that are working and of producing a significant amount of water.
How much of the Jordan River water resource is on the table for negotiation in this peace process?
I don't know the specifics of the peace process. Somebody else here might. But right now, what Palestinians are getting is in the single-digit percentage of the Jordan River. As far as the peace processes that I've looked at, unless they've added anything, they don't even mention water or the environment. So it's always been something that we'll discuss later. I've forgotten the exact percentage, but Israel gets better than half of the Jordan River, and then Syria and Jordan get a little bit.
Could you describe the aquifer for us?
Pardon?
Could you describe the aquifer?
Describe the aquifer? We've got an expert back here that actually could probably do better than I. Again, I was focusing more on facts on the ground, and as far as the actual your values of the aquifer and the like. It's a limestone aquifer, but
yeah, actually the aquifer is a carbonate aquifer. It's composed of limestone and mud, and coast, which are the aquifers, which at some place crosses the border into the Israeli side.
It's an unconfined system.
In some places it is unconfined, but mostly it is confined. In the West Bank it is confined. In Israel it is unconfined. So
Okay, what is its recharge?
the recharge is about 670 million cubic meter per year.
Where?
In the mountains of the
Yeah,
West
most of the recharge occurs in the mountains of the West Bank, and the figure that he gave you, I mean, there's so much of a wide range. I've seen anywhere from 1 billion cubic meters per year to 2 billion cubic meters per year, but I think the more recent.
So it is different between source to source, but at least it is about 600 million cubic meter per year. And the Palestinians are using around 100, and the other is being used by Israel.
Are these pump wells or do they flow naturally?
Well, there's some artesian wells, but most of them are pumped. Yeah, the aquifer is very deep. It's as I said, there's Palestinian wells. The most that I saw were around 300 meters, and Israeli wells are about 700 meters. But again, you may know more.
In the Israeli side, most of them are artesian wells, but in the Palestinian side, because the aquifers are outcrops, so it is outcrop, so it is unconfined.
Yeah, there aren't.
The other thing is that you can't get a permit to go deeper than 300 meters in the West Bank. But in Israel, I have information about some wells which have more than 1,000 meters depth.
Yeah, there are a number of springs. I don't know exactly the count, but 50 or so, or 300. Oh, okay.
About 50 of them are the main wells, the main springs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So are these wells being pumped at some sort of sustained yield, or are they being mined beyond their annual recharge? I mean, what's the sense on that?
Well, overall, the figures I've seen, it's about a 3% loss per year. So they're using more than they have, definitely. And that means all of Palestine, Israel area. Yeah, West Bank, Gaza Strip, it's about a 3% loss. It's even worse in the Gaza Strip. That's why you're having a saltwater intrusion problem, because they're overpumping the wells. Any other questions?
Tell me about the Israelis that worked with you on this solidarity movement. Did you find it was a small group, or how widespread was support?
Yeah, so the questions about the Israeli groups that worked with us. I mean, there were a whole lot of different levels that Israeli groups worked with us. There were, for instance, doctors that would go in and work with the Red Crescent Society. The number of doctors, I don't know how many, but they would make regular trips into the West Bank to assist with medical needs. You had Peace Now, that's the largest Israeli peace group. And as far as their numbers go, I don't know, but sometimes you would have thousands, several thousand. I think the largest demonstration I ever heard of or saw while I was there was about 6,000 people. But you also would have, for instance, Rabbis for Human Rights, which would come into the West Bank, and they would bring, 100 people or so to help with harvesting of olives. Gush Shalom, which is an Israeli-Palestinian group, peace group, would also have demonstrations and activities going on, and a lot of it is also it's transporting goods. Sometimes they would be bringing in food and water and whatever's on their list of needs by the Palestinians. Bet Salem is an excellent group for the written material, reports, documentation. Their website is really good to look at, and they've done reports on both the water issue but Israeli human rights issues also. But there's a number of Israeli groups that are doing a lot to try to help the situation.
Is there any Israeli law like our NEPA that would require the Israeli government to do some sort of environmental impact assessment? And was there anything done like that with respect to the wall? I mean, was it designed purely for sort of security defense needs as the Israelis perceived it, or did they actually move it in places because of migratory species or perceived environmental harms?
The closest that I saw that came to that was a report by the Minister of Environment, the Israeli Minister of Environment. There's no requirement for any type of SEPA or environmental impact study. But the Minister of Environment did issue a report saying that the wall, the barrier, is definitely doing environmental damage. And it pretty much agreed with most, in general at least, of what I've been saying and what's been said. However, they said that the security needs of Israel overrides. That's always the catchphrase that they use, is the security needs override any damage that might be done by construction of the wall. With respect to where they put the wall, a lot of that is speculation. I mean, I'm certainly haven't sat on in the meetings that decide that. But if you look at where it's going, I mean, it's Jeff Halper, who will be here tomorrow, can definitely give you some more insight into that. But as far as what the Israeli government is doing. But it's definitely a land grab. It's a water grab. The wells that are being taken in here, this area, many have said, and I've seen it even written up in the Haaretz, Israeli newspaper, that the agricultural groups, political groups in Israel have had a major voice in where the wall's going. Well, I think as far as, what I see needs to be done, the United States is a major player in what's happening there. I mean, we're supporting the occupation with our tax dollars. And I would rather see the tax dollars going to solving the problems and not creating them. From my personal standpoint anyway, where the direction that our tax dollars are going in is just exacerbating the problem. So I think whichever point you want to make, it's if we want to bring peace, we need to change what's happening there. And if you want to have a say in that, I mean, I would say write your senators, have meetings with your representatives. I regularly meet with, I'm from Seattle, Washington, and I regularly meet with the representatives there, especially McDermott, but I've also met with Murray and Cantwell and presented basically a short summary of this. I think it's just, what I'm saying is really just get politically active and get involved in the process. But first, I think, the first step is educating yourself and finding out what's going on. It's what we're seeing, for instance, in the media is a very biased view of really what's happening there on the ground. Yeah. Well, first the woman right here, the blue. And then, yeah, go ahead.
I was just wondering if the government offers any compensation to either the Palestinians or the Israelis whose lands or whatever get hurt by the wall.
Well, I haven't heard of any Israeli land being taken for the wall. Or the barrier. I don't believe there's any Israeli land. I haven't ever heard that anyway. It's almost all Palestinian land. Israel will say it's public land in some areas. That's an issue for debate. But they do offer compensation. It's rare that the Palestinians will accept compensation. For one thing, if you take money, what are you going to do with it? You can't eat money. You can't use the money to buy a new home because you can't get a permit to build a home. And the property that's there is very scarce. Most of the time what happens is when they come in and demolish your home is you've got to move in with family somewhere else. So the money, it's not a matter of money. What good it's if when Europeans came here and when we moved in and gave money to Native Americans, it's like, what good is money? There's kind of a similarity there.